Let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to try to do. First, let me introduce our participants and share my screen here. What do I want to do? I want to share that, right? And yes, people, this is done with LibreOffice, open source software. So I hope that you all can see this, this slide. Yes? Yeah, good. All right, so let me introduce the 5 panelists. First is, excuse me, got to watch out when you cough these days. So first is Carlo Ghezzi from the Politecnico di Milano, who has had a long career in the software engineering community. Manuel Mazzara, who is at Innopolis. Bertrand Meyer, who is also at Innopolis and also at Schaffhausen Institute of Technology. Alexander Tormasov, who's the rector at Innopolis, and Laurie Williams at North Carolina State University on the East Coast of the United States, and I am the chair. So the idea here, let me find my navigation. There we go. So here are the background issues. The issues that I think are the central ones that we're going to try to address during this session. So the background of this is that early this year, Moshe Vardi, who is the editor-in-chief of the communications of the ACM, wrote a column which basically said that it would be good if we didn't have all these in-person conferences because we use up the world's resources. We use carbon and the airplane and travel costs and all these kinds of things. And ACM as an organization was working to reduce carbon footprint. So I responded to this letter saying, yes, this is all a good thing, but there are some difficulties with moving to online conferences. And so time zones being one of them. Excuse me. So as you might gather, it's 9 in the morning here, and it's 7 in the evening over there. So there are occasionally some logistical problems with time zones. So I went through a few of these items, and here are the other ones. One is the trade-off between in-person and online conferences. Back in March, I attended one that was hybrid, the FOSS Asia conference, where they had people local in Singapore who attended, and many of the rest of us from around the world joined online. So what works best? We can get more people at this conference online than we ever get in person, but does the quality of the interaction hold up as well, and what's the trade-off? I already mentioned the financial concerns. There are some financial issues when you have to get on an airplane and fly somewhere and stay somewhere for 3 nights or so for the conference. For me to have come to be in person in Kazan would have cost maybe $3,000, maybe a little less. But when you multiply that by the number of attendees, that gets to be a burden for some people. But I think the areas where we want to spend the most time talking today, first is the value of face-to-face interaction. That is, if we're meeting as we are now by video, are we able to build the same kind of personal relationships with people than if we're there in the same room with them, chatting informally, meeting in the halls, and those kinds of things that we traditionally have done to get to know one another. People build networks of friends using LinkedIn and Facebook. So there's definitely a tradition of building up these kinds of networks. But on the professional side, is a LinkedIn connection or a video chat as good as actually being in the same room with someone? The next question is the whole area of community and network building. We have an ongoing series of meetings, and we want to build up our open source systems community. There are people who regularly come to these meetings. We call on them to come to meetings and to attend next year, and to eventually have responsibility for keeping the series of the conference going year after year. So having people who feel like this conference is a home for them is an important thing. And lastly, the whole background issue of the health concerns with travel and crowd. Obviously, none of us were expecting a pandemic, but now as the number of infected people continues to grow, we don't know quite when we're going to be able to travel comfortably again. And we don't know how many people are going to want to travel again. So it may be that the health concerns over the coming months or years until we have a vaccine or other ways to feel safe about traveling and being in large crowds are going to probably drive us to having online conferences. But what are we going to do after that? And that's, I think, an interesting question here. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen, go back to this. Yes, here I am. All right, so I did create some conferences, some questions. So the first one I want to ask is, what has been your experience, particularly in recent months, of remote conferences and your assessment of their effectiveness as compared to traditional modes of interaction? So I think I'm going to ask Professor Tormasov to start, and then we'll let others speak as they go. Professor Tormasov, are you there?
Yes, sorry, I just tried to switch on my sound and now I can do it.
Good.
So, good morning, good evening, good day, and some other time of the day. So this is one of the issues you mentioned on some conferences of such kind. I cannot say that I'm very actively participating in a lot of different events. I mean, offline last half a year. Mostly, I'm trying to mix online and offline meetings. But I think that sometimes one of the key reasons for people to attend for some places and some conferences is a kind of I cannot say party, but kind of things which is a combination of useful and joyful things. So this means that we can definitely visit some conferences which is not so excellent in from the initial assumption from the content point of view, but we can have something related to the place where the people comes, and maybe some new people come, and it's easier to set up the new connection in such a way than just trying to find in your screen address of the people which is potentially interesting for you and trying to contact him or her directly. So I think that again, it depends upon the reason for the conferences. If it's just an online meeting for some particular purposes, maybe it will be more efficient, especially if you have a lot of them. If it's a way just to combine the give yourself time for thinking, give yourself time for soft part of the conferences, not just the hard skills related, then maybe it will be significantly less experienced. So in that case, we need to cut the list of our places where we want to participate and try to understand by ourselves our own reasons. It's not always, at least for me, I'm not always 100% sure for what reason I'm going to somewhere. Sometimes I'm going just because I think that maybe it will be a good idea without any big background thinking. So
Okay.
this is
So
my thoughts and things about. So sorry for a long speech.
no, that's okay. I mean, sometimes we go to a conference because we like the location it's in and we want to stay a few extra days. But to come back to the question here, maybe I'll ask the other panelists, have any of you participated in a conference online recently or gone to a conference physically earlier this year?
Yeah, as for me, I just also just want to send some small portion. We used to physically visit in the beginning of February in Brussels, FOSDEM
FOSDEM.
conference, which is a huge event, huge crowd of the people, not so easy to come to the new necessary place and so on. It's from one place good, from another place bad. So
Yeah, so I did manage to reach the FOSDEM people, and FOSDEM has sent out a tweet about the conference, this conference. So maybe we will get some of the FOSDEM participants to join us here.
hope so.
And so yeah, I hope so. So did anybody else have conference experiences this year on the panel?
I'll say I have not, in the future, as in Monday, I will participate in my first other than this one. But my reactions so far are that it's the IEEE Security and Privacy Conference in your backyard, Tony.
Yep.
And I've never been to it before because it's always too close to ICSE. And so now I'm going, if you will, because I don't have to travel. It's $25. So, you know, it's easy to participate. Those are the good things. But I guess the bad thing in particular is it's only $25. And so I haven't blocked 3 days of my calendar because it's only $25. And so I'll come and go. You know, and so it's great to have accessibility and, you know, but then I guess for myself anyway, I have to respect the fact that I signed up for this conference and blocked my calendar ahead of time. I'm also, you know, one aspect of it as well is when you enrolled, I don't know if everyone got it, but there's a question when I registered, am I willing to be a mentor? And so I got put into a mentor slot. So like my time, 7 to 9:30, I think, on Monday evening, I will have some kind of a Zoom meeting where PhD students can drop in. And so I think that that's an exciting aspect of the conference. You know, I'm interested in seeing how that goes. So that's my future participation, not a past participation.
So as we do this, the All Things Open conference in North Carolina is on, and I didn't know, maybe thought you might have joined that one.
Yeah,
no. And the Skillsoft conference is on, and it's a very interesting thing. It's a worldwide conference. They're running a 24-hour conference, and they're having different keynotes in different parts of the world because, let's face it, I've missed most of today and will miss most of tomorrow being here on the left coast because, you know, one has to sleep sometime. But you raise another interesting point, actually two. One is when people are remote, and this applies to students also, do you get 100% of their attention, or do people multitask? Right? I can sit here and read, you know, this artifact called a newspaper when I feel like doing something else. So I'll ask you, when you're participating in a remote call or meeting, how do give yourself full attention to that, the mindfulness that it needs.
Well, in recent years, people have started multitasking in physical conferences as well. Actually, it's something I find very irritating. But in the typical conference room, especially in the second half, in the back half of the room, you can see most people happily hitting at their keyboards. So it's not a new phenomenon.
Right. So this is interesting. You know, as a speaker, and I always use that as a metric. Years ago, it was the idea that if I was talking and people started leaving, then I knew that either there was some great hot topic or free lunch, or I was boring them. And now, you know, people have such short attention spans that, you know, after 3 minutes or so, if they're not interested in what you're saying, then out come the smartphones and they're texting and doing other things. Bertrand, your point is very well taken.
But can I say something?
Sure.
Even if you're not inside the room and listen to the people speaking, what you do is that you are outside and you talk to other people. So most of the activities actually at a conference are outside and not inside the rooms where you have presentations. And this is another important aspect to keep into account.
So that's a good, so how do we do that in an online world? I mean, you and I could set up a side chat, or I could pull up WhatsApp and we could exchange messages. In fact, some of the television channels and social organizations are doing things like joint watching of movies, which is almost the same thing, that here's a movie that you can watch, and oh, by the way, here's a chat room that you can chat about the movie while you're watching it. You know, obviously this is a possibility for us in future settings.
So Tony, I've prepared a few slides on the background of conferences. So if and when there is time, give me 5 minutes. If not, I'll keep them for posterity. Okay,
yeah. So it's hard to do too many slides in this kind of a setting, but do you have I thought you were on the phone. I didn't know that you could share the screen.
No, I'm both on the using the phone for audio and the computer for video.
I see. Okay. Well, we'll try to come back.
I have a long experience of this. This is the way to work if you don't have a very good internet connection.
So that's an interesting form of multitasking, isn't it? Okay. So my little headset works. As you gathered, I've been to several of these conferences that take place online these days while I shelter in place here. And it's a different experience. But one of the things, for those of you who are listening in the audience, one of the things I'd like to poll everybody about at the end is, which do you prefer? Would you like to have an in-person conference in the future? Would you like to have a strictly online? Or would you like to have this kind of a hybrid conference where people have the option of going to a place, but if you can't get there, maybe you have a low-cost option to stream the conference live, which many conferences already have been doing even before COVID-19. Any thoughts on the panel?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's likely that when this is all done, that conferences will be much more supportive of a mixed model like that. I know I have some experience with some of these issues. I'm the steering committee chair for ICSE, and even before this all started, you know, the world having more travel restrictions, you know, driven out of the U.S., more visa restrictions, was already bringing, like, you know, opening up remote presentations. And so I think that probably when all is said and done, that the acceptability of remote presentations and remote presentations will be much greater than it is now. And so I would guess a hybrid model going forward.
Yeah, and one of the things, maybe Giancarlo can chip in here. You know, this conference was able to attract invited speakers who might not have been able to come to Kazan, even if there weren't the travel restrictions. As you've seen, our invited speakers are from distances far and near, and to have them as part of our conference is something that we might not have been able to do if it were strictly an in-person conference. Giancarlo, is that?
I mean, I have to thank all of you because of that, because among the panelists of today's panel, only Tony was planning to come and to join us. So in a sense, you know, this situation has created a striking advantage. A small conference like this one, which last year had about 20, 30 participants, this year had enrolled, which does not mean active, almost 300 people. Perhaps because it was the first one, right? So it was a first model, perhaps because, as Laurie mentioned, was cheap. So this one has no cost. Or perhaps because it's a different world. And Carlo mentioned in his answer, he always was doubting about the fact that now conference need to change format. Perhaps this is the time to change the format. And this is what you are very wisely discussing. I think Bertrand has some slides, and now Bertrand is co-chair of Zoom, of our tool. So Bertrand can share the slides if you think, Tony, that it's the right time.
Yeah, let's do it. Well, Bertrand was ahead of me.
Okay, so, you know, I think it's important to get some of the background. So where do scientific conferences come from? They're actually a fairly old tradition. You can go back to the Middle Ages, you know, with literary academies, like in Toulouse, which says it's the oldest one, still running one in the world. And then they extended more to science because the original ones were more literary. So you have the Accademia dei Lincei in Italy, you have and then you have the societies, but the societies were partly funded by government and partly obedient to governments, you know, Royal Society in the UK, Académie des Sciences in France. And what's also interesting is that they very soon started to produce proceedings. So we complained about conferences being, you know, journaled in a hotel, in particularly in computer science, but this is not a new phenomenon. And the true scientific conferences beyond the academy started towards the end of the 19th century, often in connection with the creation of scientific societies. And so you have a few of them which are very famous, you know, the Solvay conferences from 1911, they're still running. This is the most famous one. The fifth one was probably the 1927, probably the highest concentration of Nobel Prizes ever gathered anywhere on this planet or others. Then you have the International Congress of Mathematicians with a particularly famous 1901 where David Hilbert poses problems. This is not the Paris one, this is another one in 1937. So conferences have created a huge ecosystem. It's an industry in many senses of the term, and they do lots of things. So I'm not going to go through all the bullet points, but when I was preparing this, I kept, since I wanted it to be on the slide, I kept making the font smaller and smaller because conferences do lots and lots of things. So, for example, they run a little extortion business, right? Either you pay the conference fees or your paper doesn't get published and you don't get tenure and so on. They serve as rewards in many ways. They actually award prizes. This is one of the major task of conferences. You meet every year, or for mathematicians every 4 years, and you get the prizes in the field. They allow participants to find out what's new in their field, what are the new trends, but they meet others. But you know, if towards the bottom here, you meet people you know. So you know, are you going to be at ICSI next month? Then we can meet and have a little session on the side. you can also also get to know people you know about but you don't know. You know, all my life I wanted to meet Professor Giancarlo Succi, and I hear he's going to be at ICSI, so I'm going to. This is my opportunity in a lifetime. And of course, you have these chance meetings because you're much more likely to find an interesting person in your field at a conference at ICSI than somewhere else. So also, you know, there's a whole ecosystem. There are lots of people who have a vested interest in making conferences, physical conferences happen. I mean, I've organized literally hundreds of conferences, and as anyone who's been in this business, you know, anyone knows that if you organize conferences, you're contacted regularly, maybe I should say harassed by people from Cyprus who have made it an industry to organize conferences in Cyprus. So there are lots and lots of people who have a vested interest in this continuing. So advantages of remote setups like this one: no need to travel. Then, as Giancarlo and Tony pointed out, I think it was Giancarlo, you can have speakers you would not have had otherwise. I'm sorry, this was Tony who mentioned it. You can extend, you can have more attendees who would not have traveled. It's often cheaper for attendees. I mean, maybe we'll get to a model where our Zoom conferences are as expensive as the physical conferences, but right now it's not the case. And of course, we avoid catching disease because Zoom is certified COVID-free. The drawbacks, on the other hand, are numerous. I mean, there are fewer possibilities of financial gain for organizers. Maybe this is a good thing. But certainly people are suffering from this, whose business is there. We have communication problems, although I think people have improved a lot and the technology has improved a lot. We have the absence of direct personal physical contact, the absence of chance encounters. You know, you don't get to meet someone. You might get to meet someone whom you know, but you're not going to get someone by accident. And also you cannot go aside and have enough session work. So final comments, my prognosis. I don't think we should just panic or we should just go with the latest trend. Of course, the world is in a panic, the world is in a crisis at the moment, but this crisis will subside. If it doesn't subside, then we're all in trouble. And I think conferences are probably the last thing we're going to worry about. But, you know, I remember very well how after September 11, people were saying they were not going to have conferences the way we used to because air travel is going to be much harder. Well, the next decade or the next 20 years have actually been the most booming time for conferences ever. So we should keep our calm and continue to look at the situation as scientists, you know, objectively. So traditional, contrary maybe to some of what my distinguished panelists have said, my belief is that traditional conferences will come back with a vengeance. In the same way that after confinement, you want to touch people, you want to go back to normal life, even more than before. I think it's going to be the same with conferences. Of course, we will have mixed models, and of course, we will have more remote conferences in the sense that some conferences are going to be organized that way. But we shouldn't forget, and this is my last point, the existing problems with conferences in computer science. The ones that Moshe Vardi, for example, since he was mentioned, has been talking about for years. You know, the fact that we have a somewhat crazy selection system, which emphasizes very artificial criteria. These problems are not going away, and I would suggest actually focusing more on getting a better publication process in computer science.
All right, so thank you for your speech. Let's go back to the discussion. Can I have the screen back? One of the things that Bertrand pointed out is this idea of going to conferences to meet people. Some of us go to conferences almost like a social event. ICSI is a good example because it's been around since 1975 or 6. You go to ICSI and you know people. So there's that. There's the also the idea of meeting new people. And one of the points that comes up, Bertrand also mentioned this, is tenure. So if you're a junior faculty member and you want to meet Professor Suchi or Professor Mayer because they're working in your field and they might be people who would write a letter of recommendation for you for promotion, it's much better to do it and, you know, shake their hands or whatever physical meeting instead of just having an online relationship. What do people think about that?
I mean, I think there's nothing like the real thing. Like there's no way to substitute. As the technologists of the world, I think that we will be able to come up with some solutions that can be compromises to the real thing. But I think that, you know, we will want to have conferences, and I agree with Bertrand that I think that for the most part they'll come back. I don't think that COVID is going to be around forever. There might be other viruses, but I know that for ICSE we had to call in, I guess I'm not going to pronounce it right, force majeure or something like that, you know, so an act of God kind of closure or clause, but hotels are going to be less likely to have generous policies like that. So I think that there's going to be, like, you know, people nervous about conferences for a while. But I know as we are planning the ICSE virtual, it's actually going to be mixed. There'll be an on-site in South Korea as well as virtual event. And, you know, we're trying to overcome some of the challenges of time zone and things like that by having 3 tracks, like Asia track, America track, and a Europe track with different time zones, different talks in different time zones. But mainly, like, you know, one of the things we are talking about are the social events, and still running new faculty symposium, still running doctoral symposium, and, you know, can we have breakout rooms? And I don't know if you're familiar with it, but ACM quickly came up with a document, what is it called? Virtual Conferences Guide. And there's a good number of, I don't know, maybe 10 bullet items of suggested ways to bring back the social aspects into a conference. And I think that it's really, really essential for all the reasons that you said. People who just want to meet with someone, tenure promotion, you know, just guidance and mentoring. I know that, you know, those of us in the senior members of the community, like people just, PhD students, say, you know, they definitely come with a goal to talk to you. And so we want to make sure that they have the ability to do that.
Yeah, so we've even done that with our faculty. We have happy hours now and then, and there's no agenda. You just come and meet and, you know, talk about whatever is on your mind at that particular moment.
Right.
I just also want to add, if it's possible.
Sure.
Okay, so what I see again on this last conferences, but I think it's the same moment. They became kind of intermediate between the online and offline, because typically for these first DEM conferences, sometimes the room inside the rooms became too small, and typically the organizers say that we are doing the live streaming. If you want, you can stay with your computer just behind the door, but from other side. And if you want, then it's a kind of offline conferences. So this is a things which is important, but also important that you can not only to talk with the people together, but you also see a lot of recruit companies. I mean, the company who want to recruit people for this. As usual, for such event, I see the activity of Google, VMware, some other companies, and so on. So, and it's relatively hard to do it during such an online conferences. It's another aspect of the things. And it's also harder to making some question notes and more direct interaction. And that's why I think that the idea, that's also, it's for me, it's relatively hard to listen for the relatively slow speech. I prefer, instead of taking a look for the video, I prefer to read the writings on this, because I can read relatively fast, and it's, for me, it's quite boring. I can predict the next 5 minutes of speak, and that's why I switched to another directions, at least temporary. I understand that this is not the best way to do things. I understand, but the problem of modern life, we bring it together to the conferences as well. So I think that this is another big difference between the conference with online and offline things, and this is the
So,
important things. Okay.
so, but let me follow up with this. One of the lessons I think of remote teaching, which we're all doing in our universities, is that you have to run your class and you have to give your talk in a completely different way. That is, you know, if you look at things like the Khan Academy, which has been doing this for a decade or more, the talks are given in 10-minute segments.
Right.
So that
Very strong. Yeah.
so you get a very quick presentation, and you know, some of the slide presentations we've seen in traditional conferences, I agree with you completely. I mean, they go on and on and on, and they are predictable. Whereas if you have to get your thoughts across in 5 minutes or 10 minutes, you really cut to the chase. Here are the takeaways, and you present in a different way, and it's
Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily transpose to conferences, because, you know, I've done MOOCs, for example, for edX, several of them. It's a very strict intellectual discipline, and indeed, they tell you to cut into 8 to 10 minutes. Actually, they told me more 8 minutes, which is not easy for me, because I'm not, I mean, concision doesn't come naturally for me. But then the result is that it's an awful amount of work. It's an extraordinary amount of work. And you can do this for a class that's going to have 10,000 remote students. You are not going to do it for every conference presentation. So I doubt that the format will change very much. I mean, people are people, PhD students are PhD students, and if their professors don't coach them to give a good talk when they go to a conference, I don't think they're going to do it when they prepare a recorded presentation.
right. Okay.
Can I say something?
If I can make a point about this. So I projected a picture of 2002. You see Lori here. This picture is taken at UPSLA in Seattle. You know who was the keynote speaker? It was Bill Gates. Now, the conference had more than 1,000 participants. So it was a huge event, right? Huge event. And regardless of the COVID, I think we noticed that conferences had a downward trend. And Carlo mentioned it very, very clearly in one of the statements he saw. Personally, I don't go very often to conference. I don't like much to go. But regardless, conference start to be always less attended. So while teaching, if you just talk about teaching, has always been something which varies from time to time. When people say students nowadays are not listening more than 10 minutes, but that was the same when we were students, right? Perhaps the student population has increased, but the variety of students has always been different. And so taking into account the very nice presentation by Bertrand, you know, Bertrand made clear the evolution of conference, going from the conference of the late 19th century to the end of 19th century, going up and down. And going back to the question of Carlo, where are we going? Where do you think that we are going, regardless of COVID, with conferences? Or are there the mechanisms by which we are going to spread and discuss knowledge, as in one of the points made by Bertrand? Or we are inventing something new?
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead, Carlo.
Okay.
Can I have the screen back?
No, it seems to me that, you know, we some of the people there we're saying that what we are doing now is an exception handling. We have COVID-19. We have to handle, you know, conferences online, and then eventually we will go back to normal. I actually believe that, you know, we have a major disruption here. We don't know how long it will take. It may take longer than we think. On the other hand, we have another major disruption, which you mentioned. We have to take care of climate change, of the footprint that, you know, participating in conferences is, you know, is giving. isn't this time to really think about a paradigm shift? You know, whenever there's major disruptions, there is a challenge, and there is also an opportunity for a paradigm shift. You know, of course, we grew up with conferences, and you know, as I said, there is a big value, which is the networking, the social aspect, community building, sharing, you know, with other people, building a community, and this is absolutely essential. But then there's, you know, delivering papers. This can be done online, but the other aspect cannot be done online, at least with the technology that we have today. So we have to find new ways of making, you know, this possible, maybe through a different kind of technology, and we can take the lead in doing this. You know, I was reading, you know, recently, just to give you an example of, you know, what technology can do. I was reading recently, you know, again, I think I told you guys, you know, the famous novel, The Plague by Albert Camus. And he was talking about the plague and not COVID-19, of course. And what he says is that the greatest suffering at the time, people was that people did not, people did not have computers, of course, at the time. And he said that the greatest suffering, the most general and the most profound, was separation at the time. You know, people were segregated in their homes, they couldn't communicate. Today, the technology that we have today makes it possible for the individuals to be connected. You know, for example, I had lunches with my children in Zurich, shared using Skype. I have been playing chess with my grandchild almost every day. So I had a social life, which made it, you know, very different for me, you know, to be, you know, inside my home for several weeks. Now, the point is that this technology is not good enough to support the social activities that go with research. So maybe this is something that we should think about, you know, what do we need to do that? I think that Laurie was starting to mention something like this by the ACN. I think that this is something that, you know, should be one of the, you know, the major, let's say, community activities that we have to engage with in the future. It is important, especially for the young generations, and we have to do something, and maybe, you know, there's a possibility there.
So let me ask Manuel Mazzara to comment. He's been quiet so far. So can you add your thoughts about this?
Of course, I was listening to the other opinions. Of course, I formed myself a very opinionated opinion, if you want, a very strong opinion. When we started teaching online, we had basically 1 week of preparation. And the same. I want to mention one point about teaching, but it can apply also to conferences. Initially, it's like when you are a kid, there is a new toy, a new gadget. So there was some excitement. No, now we do something new. We can use Zoom, we can use YouTube. It's fun. You can play with your computer, do something, create videos. There was this initial excitement. Second step was a step of adaptation, and this, I mean, these 3 phases that I'm describing can last minutes, hours, or years, depending on the individuals. You know? Then there is an adaptation, and the third phase, there is a feeling of missing something. So I think that almost everyone went through these phases. I don't know if in this order. And the same if now we would switch immediately. I don't think it's happening, but if from today only online conferences will exist in future, I think we would go through these 3 phases. Eventually, we understand that we miss something. This is a very exciting conference. It's very fun. It's very nice to see all the videos, all the faces of everyone there, to talk, to share the screen. There are so many things that we can do fast that we couldn't do. We cannot do in a normal conferences, of course. There are advantages. but eventually I think we will miss the real thing. And as Bertrand pointed out before, it's very unlikely that physical conferences will disappear forever. He mentioned September 11, but there are major disruption in the past, even before our lifespan. No, think about World War I, World War II. Many things suspended, but eventually they resumed. Of course, each of this event is a game changer. So there is an evolution in things. So I'm pretty sure that after this event, that will probably last 1 or 2 years, the conference organizers will be much more keen to accept remote participation, which was basically forbidden now. You had to pay and participate, but this will become more an hybrid model, and this is one of the changes. Regarding physical conferences, also, of course, it's part of the tourism industry. I mean, conference is also part of is feeding hotels and flight carriers. So I hope that it will not disappear, because it's also very good component of our economy, of the world economy.
Good. So, Laurie, I want to come back to you with something, because you talked earlier about mentoring, and I think that this is certainly an issue. ICSE, I know, has mentoring sessions for new attendees, but if we talk about the faculty issues, if future meetings are mostly online, what's the impact going to be on young faculty, minorities, women, and other people who are not already part of our network? All of us are pretty senior and we can freely call one another up, but it's not the same thing for the people who don't know the system.
Can I comment on this?
Oh, I would let me see if Laurie is there. We'll take her first, and then we'll come back to you. Can you get some light on your face? Go ahead, Laurie. You're it.
To unmute myself. Okay, finally
Yeah,
I
there you
unmute.
are.
I clicked on it several times. Okay, so my view is similar to others, is that we'll probably end up having some kind of a hybrid model. And when we think about, say, new faculty and people trying to get tenure in the mentoring, like several issues that we were dealing with in ICSE would be resolved by a hybrid model, like visa issues. The whole Journal First program was trying to bring more people into our community, and so if we had a hybrid model, that would help. Of course, the climate impact. But what we really do have to do is embrace the hybrid model completely, which means if we have a new faculty symposium, that some people will be remotely participating and some people will be in person. And, and some people will want mentoring remotely and some people will want it in person. So I think that we really just need to embrace this completely. And I think it was Bertrand we need to develop the technology and just the mechanisms, the procedures. Like I know in the class that I taught, I used Zoom breakout rooms. And so when it got time to do an exercise, I just randomly assigned students to work with other students. And they loved it, actually. Even though I did that in the classroom in person, they always worked with the same people because they sat with the same people. And then now it was kind of like a Russian roulette, like who am I gonna work with today? And in the course evaluations, they seem to like it. And so similar types of things could be done with conferences where you could just be randomly assigned, or like if you look at the ACM document, there could be where you would express when you register, these are some people I would like to speak with. And then somehow the algorithms would eventually put you together, in a remote way.
So let me go to Manuel again, and then I want to come back and follow up with you about ICSE. Manuel?
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to comment about careers that you mentioned. I think this is, I have the impression that this is not a very, very good time for people that are in important turning point of their career.
Yes.
I'm noticing now about PhD students graduating, or bachelor, or maybe young researchers that typically, as I did and all of us did at some point, you graduate your PhD and you apply everywhere in the world, and you can get position virtually in any country. And this was one of the big advantages. And especially when you graduate your PhD, that is really the moment in which you have the largest number of opportunities. But now I see here, but not only here, that this is not the case. And there is a disruption that will have consequences and will last a few years. Eventually, it will be probably change again, but it's a position of disadvantage for literally everyone, not only for minority. This is what I'm noticing right now.
Great. So Laura, let me come back to you on this. Thank you. Excuse me, the ICSE decision about trying to have an Asian and an American and a European version, does that suggest that you might record a keynote talk that's given in Asia, for example, and then later in the day, somebody could watch the recording of that keynote so that you'd end up doubling or tripling some sessions?
Well, so it is a recording, so like things will be available. If you want to have any kind of interaction, then you need to be live. You know, if
Right.
you want to ask a question or anything like that. But so there will be 3 bands per day. You know, I think that they're going to be 2 or 3 hour stretches, like 3 hours in each one of the time zones, spread throughout 24 hours, which makes ICSE be more. I mean, we're really formulating it as we go. But say ICSE will be 5 days instead of 3 because things will be spread out more. And in some time zones, you'll be lucky enough to get the keynote speaker, and others you might want to record. And hopefully one thing that we've all learned from this too is to not abuse our bodies and to sleep when we're supposed to sleep. And so like that's one of the disadvantages of this kind of a model where, you know, you might want to be tempted to be awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, but you probably shouldn't be.
Well, you know, of course, with all the dot-com startups and all the people who are, working full time, there are some people who do that. But it raises one more question for me, because ICSE is not just the conference, but it's a bunch of workshops and co-located conferences, and so it's a massive coordination effort.
Right. And so we're waiting for different events to tell us what they're going to do. But one thing I'll say, and Giancarlo can probably attest to this, that like just going virtual means it's still a lot of work. And so like ICSE, the whole virtual effort is massive. And so if you're talking about a hybrid model, now you have like a local arrangements, massive effort, and a virtual, massive effort. And so the number of volunteers, the number of student volunteers just grows.
Yeah, I just also want to add some. Sorry. Okay. I can just one add on for this about the cultural differences. And some of the conferences do help the students with different cultural background or occasion, and some students are hesitate to ask people and to talk with them. So I think that this is offline conferences allows you to do it, but for online conferences, we typically do not have such an ability. If you have the, I don't know, keynote speaker with 10,000 participants, there are no way to answer and just setting up some questions, connections, and so on. So I think that maybe we need to introduce or to think about. I think that we have all technical ideas. We have to do something organizational in terms of pushing this problem in such a way, like we can organize some, I don't know, some special small events with a small number of people where peer-to-peer communication will be significantly easier. It's not necessary for offline conferences because you already have some, I don't know, common dinners, all this presentation in the same room, you are talk with each other and so on. But even in that conditions, the problems and all this hesitation can be go away. But it's not the case for online system, and especially for the people who comes from the far places, I don't know, from the village in India or in Russia or somewhere else. And it's, I think it's time to think about how we can add some features for the new online conferences as well.
Yes. So there's one thing that people have done elsewhere, which is in politics, if you're going to run a rally, for example, and you want to have a town hall with thousands and thousands of people, they have a moderator who is separate from the speaker, and the moderator fields the questions and then sorts out certain ones to be answered. And that's done in business meetings as well when they have shareholder meetings and the like. So that model might apply to us. I noticed that we're almost out of time. So if there are people who want to
Yeah.
make one last comment.
Can I make a couple of comments?
I would just to reply to Lori in terms of workload. I would say that actually, I have to be honest, the workload is much longer. Perhaps because it was the first one, right? So there was a benefit of doubt. I had, I have to thank all the people, Artyom, Mufi, Vladimir, Manuel, Yasilia, everyone worked like crazy to have this event in the last week, but I didn't feel a big amount of stress. You all accepted very fast, but because perhaps it's the first one. So, there was no benchmark, there was no expectation. The expectation was major failure. Tony has been repeating to me for 3 months, you are going to fail, right, Tony? He told me, you will never have a success. So I'm so motivated us. And so my benchmark was major failure. I can always do better than major failure. I'm not going to be stressed for this, right? Sorry, I go back.
I just pushed you guys to do certain things. But
just to say, if a benchmark is failing, I can always do better. So there is no stress.
Can I make a couple of comments? In general comments, actually harking back to the discussion before. We mentioned conferences. Famous conferences. I mentioned conferences of mathematicians and physicists. And Giancarlo mentioned UPSLA, but in my career there was really for many people, not specifically for me, but for many people, an absolute turning point, which was the first UPSLA in 1986, when finally object-oriented programming exploded to the face of the world. And I admire very much what Lori has been describing in all the efforts that are being made, including for this conference by Giancarlo and others. But I cannot imagine the equivalent with human beings being as they are and designed as they are. I cannot imagine the virtual equivalent. And my second and last comment is an analogy. For my company, i4 Software, has been running for more than 15 years now in a completely distributed way. There's no room with developers. They are in different places, and I got very interested in distributed development. Offsourcing, offshoring, outsourcing, and so on. Started teaching courses on it, and based on my experience in particular, the first thing I said every time in the first week of the semester was, here's the first principle of distributed software development. Don't do it. Okay? If you have a choice between having people in Tanzania, Argentina, everywhere, or having them all under one roof, do it. It's not. We don't do it out of a choice. We do it because we have to. And I think this analogy transposes to conferences.
Okay, good. Well, anybody else? So, I think maybe we should try as a panel to write some of this up, because I think there were some interesting observations that everybody made. So one of these days we'll see what we can do. I want to thank the audience for staying. Maybe you didn't notice, but the number of people in the session didn't change over the whole session. So now maybe they're off doing something completely different, but at least the number of people online has not changed. So it's the end of today's sessions, I think, and I want to thank all the organizers who made this technology work. And I want to thank all the panelists for their valuable comments. And that concludes the panel. Thank you very much.
And this concludes also the day, but let me thank you, Tony, for your presence, for you being present at the beginning and at the end of this conference. Let me thank Lori, Carlo, Bertrand, Ivica, which I see there, and then indeed Manuel, Paolo, who I see now online here, for contributing to this event. And
Andrei also.
Andrei is also online, sorry. Andrei is still there, so Andrei, hi. And so let me thank you all. Let me thank my rector, Alexander, who is here also attending the conference. And I hope some of you will also have a time tomorrow to join us. And anyway, I hope to see you all virtually or in presence soon.
All right. Adios. До свидания.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye
Bye.
bye bye bye.